All right, so first of all, I've got to say, you know, they tell senior leaders their #1 job is to create the next generation of leaders that'll replace them. Jay took that task literally. Jay, I've been so impressed with Hunter, man. You've raised a great leader. All right, the second thing I've got to say as I look out over this audience is I can see exactly why it's logisticians that make this Air Force so great. The determination I see out there, the determination that got you out here on Friday, the last day of the conference. Oh, by the way, the morning after St. Patrick's Day celebrations. It's that kind of determination that I know we'll be able to overcome any challenge we've got to face here. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit, some of the challenges we face here in the theater. So first of all, our intent here is to get through I keep looking behind me. The slides you see, that's probably the most words you're going to see on any of the slides we show, first of all. So we'll go easy on your eyes this morning. Second of all, our intent is to kind of get through this as quickly as possible and really let this be a discussion led by you and the kind of questions you have. So they're going to be posting that QR code occasionally. Be sure and snap it and post your questions because we'd love to hear your questions. All right. Oh, I was about to say next slide. Okay, so here's what we're talking about today. All right, Europe and the Pacific. Not really consequential, right? The SecAF says China, China, China. And if you open your phone right now, I guarantee it says Russia, Russia, Russia. All right, so this is actually pretty timely. So first we're going to do some comparing and contrasting between the two theaters. This is mine, right? Blue is NATO. It's an alliance, agreement of partnerships, great integration between our militaries and our air forces. The greens are friendly countries. The orange obviously is conflict, and the red's where we've got some issues. But you'll also notice that you can get from just about any point on this map to any other point on this map by driving if you had to. In contrast, Sean.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and this one's mine, and yeah, we don't have the luxury of driving out this way, and it's good to see our Royal Australian Air Force partners here today. That's Eurasia imposed over the ocean there, and you can see the distance that we have there. We have tremendous partners out in the Pacific, too, and a long storied history of working together, which is a big part of our effort, but certainly relying upon air and sea, as we've talked about earlier in this week, to get our job done and do contested logistics.
All right, the yellow stars you can see are the mobs, the main bases we have posted in my AOR.
And then you've got ours, right? So out in the Pacific, and you know, we're heavily focused right now on the distribution network and working with Indo-PACOM and our service components and partners on building that distribution network to come, and this is what we have to operate all the way from Alaska into Korea and everything in between.
Yeah. Now this is probably where the difference is most shown. Notionally, a representation of usable airfields that I have in my theater, places where when we talk about ACE, where we could do some dispersed ops. Notice almost all of them are in those blue countries that are alliances of ours, and we've got them from the rear all the way up to what we're using in today's fight, right up against that eastern front. Again, almost every single one of those dots can be connected by a road.
So for us, I think the benefit of going here on Friday is we've had a lot of discussion this week, and y'all have heard from a lot of different folks, and I think Admiral Walsh gave the best overview of why we care about China that I've seen to date, if you saw that the other day. And so for us, it's about agile combat employment, and it's not something we want to do, it's something we have to do. So you see here, once again, notional, we have locations out in the Pacific, and if you do your World War II history and back, many of these airfields, these islands were used back then, and can be used today and need to be used in the future. So we use the agile combat employment concept to move around and position those. It'll be a big part of what we talk about as we go through this today on how we're going to do contested logistics in this theater.
Yeah, so I look at this, and no matter how challenging my job gets, I thank myself that I am not him, because he's got it a lot harder, right? Okay, so what we've done is we've set the scene for you, showing what a lot of the differences are between the two theaters and those challenges. What we're going to transition to now is where a lot of the similarities are, and that's our requirements for how we get after this. The main way we do this, and it's not just a catchphrase, it really is, you can ask my boss, it's persistent mission generation. All right, what that means to my boss in today's fight, it means that the pointy nose aircraft can take off with the smaller pointy nose things under its wings or in its bays and execute its mission. And so everything we've talked about this week at LOA, everything is to enable that, right? That's the very pointy end of the spear. That's why we do it all. It's to execute that air power mission at the pointy end of the spear. So we're going to get back and we're going to talk logistics stuff and setting the theater and basing and stuff like that. I'd ask us all to keep in mind that that's what we're doing. We're enabling that pointy end of the spear. So here's where we start with requirements.
And when I arrived at PACAF over a year ago, my boss said the same thing. He said, Sean, it's about logistics, this fight out here. He's very focused. And my counterparts are my A3, A58 brothers. It's the same thing. It's been really refreshing to see from those two communities, they can tell our logistics story as well as, if not better than I can, over the last couple decades. They've grown up with us, and we saw that, I think, on the stage yesterday for the theory of constraints with the operational leadership that was up here. So it's really refreshing. And logistics under attack, my boss looks to us in the A4 combat support entity. He values pre-positioning, and he values how hard and challenging our task is. So one thing we've done, I think when you look at a task this dynamic, you can get caught up and a little bit frustrated about how you're going to tackle this. And I would offer that we've kind of just gone back to the basics of planning and preparation, right? Good old-fashioned operational planning to get after this. And you know, one analogy, we've talked a little bit of sports this week with the basketball going on, but if you want to use a football analogy, there's a college football coach, I won't name his name, but he's quoted as saying, some think that when you're in the heat of the battle, you'll rise to the level of your competition, right, or your capability. But in fact, what he says is you don't do that. You fall to the level of your training and preparation. So we're doing a lot of detailed work. And what you see in front of you is a notional airfield. And so out in the Pacific, what we're looking for is 9,000-foot runways, not one, but two, multiple taxiways, parking ramps, lollipops off of those parking ramps, areas we can operate. If you go back and look at the World War II footage and photos from the aerial views on these islands, you'll see that there are a tremendous number of airfields that are out there today. Some of them are not being used, some of them we don't have access to, and some of them we do. We want to do some work on those airfields to enable ACE, to enable us to do our plan.
Right, and that's what it gets down to. Across the top, you'll see one of the ways that we kind of break this up in USAFE by level of infrastructure at bases. So what you're seeing here, it's a runway that's a suitable runway. It's got some ramp space, it's got a taxiway, but that's about it. That falls in what we call in USAFE the Delta and the Charlie category of airfields, and we're plenty of those. But to be honest, we're not really focused on those. That's too long a haul, and it's too much investment that we don't have to get after that. And in my theater, we don't have to, because we've got plenty of other choices.
So we've been working and on that effort just to plan. The 3, 4, and 5/8 in PACAF have formed a group, a General Officer Decision Board on ACE, and we meet every month, and we've basically just outlined the key objectives we want to get after. So China's playing the infinite game, and we're thinking infinite game also, but we want to know, what are we going to get done this year? Like, what are the things we can do, our short list, to get done? So we're just good old-fashioned objectives. What is our desired outcome? What are our tasks? And what can we get after? One of the first things we did was we went to our 3 and said, we need to do some ACE site surveys at locations. Now, we've been to all these pieces of land. We, Indo-PACOM, we, the components, we are partners, but we need to get there with a different lens, with an ACE lens. So what we've started doing is building placemats, and this is somewhat representative of the placemat. Now, we're building them with PowerPoint. So to the data analytics and discussions we've had on Blade earlier this week, we definitely are working on that too to bring that forward so we don't have to build things. But we're building placemats. We've had some engineers on our team doing this. So what you see in front of you here, we've got a site survey plan. We're out there right now in our exercise program using that as a catalyst to do that. And we're going out at each airfield. In the PACAF theater, we have this thing called regional base clusters. So we have clusters of bases, and we have a concept regional base cluster prepositioning. So that is essentially what WRM, War Reserve Material, what mission equipment, and what future RDT&E new stuff that we need, what is it and where can we put it ahead of time to support mission generation. And that's what you see in your top corner there, the triangle. You've got airlift that's going to bring in with the units and the stuff we need and tip fid, but we need to place stuff at these hubs and spokes, pre-positioned to take the pressure off the tip fid and the O plan. Because quite frankly, as we've heard from speakers this week, if we wait for the O plan and the tip fid to kick off and stuff to move, it's going to be too late. We don't have that luxury in the Pacific. And so around there, you'll see example of stuff. So in that rib SIP, we are building out everything we need, like down to stock number level, and doing research to see what can be bought. And we're working with Air Force Material Command, many partners with industry, and laying that out and communicating that requirement, if you will, back to the big Air Force corporate structure, so that if and when we do get funding, and I have a little USAFE envy with PDI, and you know, we bought some equipment in Europe in the past, right, and they have their challenges too, so Dutch has his challenges and constraints, but if and when we start buying equipment for the Pacific to the level we need to be able to place it. So what you see there is the beginning of a placement around an airfield to best get after things, and that includes the full combat support. So it's your engineering, your airfield damage repair, it's going to be defense of the installation, our defenders, and it's going to be the stuff we need to support maintenance and operations.
Yeah, so the USAFE equivalent to PACAF's RIB-SIB is DABS, or DABS FEV, as you may have heard it called. To be perfectly honest, DABS was the requirement built to get after those Delta and Charlie airfields that you saw on the last slide, to support a plan that didn't take into account cooperation with our NATO alliances. What we're looking at more closely now is using these airfields in alliance with our partners so we can kind of cut those requirements quite a bit. So DAB's a necessary requirement to get after, you know, the worst case scenario, but we're going to do a little bit of restructuring on those to see if we can pull some of that stuff forward to these locations to set that out. One more thing that's really important to my boss is if the pointy nose thing is going to take off with little pointy things underneath it, they want to have those aircraft arresting systems there. So investment in the MAZs.
So kind of this is representative of an end state, right? It's an airfield that has a combination of MILCON, military construction development, and then you'll see some ACE development around that. And I want to take a few minutes to talk about that. So while we definitely want to invest in infrastructure and have been in the Pacific and need to at locations, we don't necessarily need, if you build the typical bulk fuel location, your munitions storage, you put all your people together, we know by what we've seen this week and talked about just in the open that that stuff will get attacked. We're counting on that being attacked and losing significant amount of that. So we've got to disperse at that airfield in conjunction with the build out. So what you'll see here is we're talking, I'll use POL as an example. We still want the bulk fuel, but we want bladders, right? And we may not just want the 10 that we think we may need, maybe we need 20, 25 or 30 around the airfield spread out. Do they all have to have fuel in them? Maybe not, right? So CC&D, camouflage, concealment, and deception. Do our people need to be all in the same area of the installation when they bed down? Probably not. So I think some of this ACE thing, Agile Combat Employment, the scheme of maneuver, there's a big culture piece with ACE too, right? And I think all of us that have come through our careers and we have the luxury of having the air superiority and not going against a peer, we're not going to have that in the future. So we've got to think differently. A bulk of what we're doing in the Pacific too is while we're working the MILCON investment, we're looking at less than the military construction level to do some build out with our engineers. So what can we do on the money we do have? And so we've been working with the Air Force Civil Engineer Center, the CBs, the other services in the AOR, And I'll use one example. There's an installation, a location outside of Anderson Air Force Base that we essentially own, and we're going to use that as a prototype. And we're going to build out this. So we're going to bring the second runway back to life. It's grown over. We're going to build parking ramps with our organic PACAF assets combined with Red Horse with the engineers using less than MILCON authority. Our big constraints are environmental. That's probably the #1 piece. I think we've learned too is in the CENTCOM AOR, we've had some luxury in some cases of not having all of the, maybe the laws or some of the things we have to follow as we did those efforts. And I think we're selectively looking at what waivers, what exemptions can we get in the Pacific. Because we can't do this slow, right? We've seen what China's doing. They're going really fast, and we need to go really fast too with the sense of urgency. So that's some of our other constraint there. On the RIBSIP stuff I mentioned, when I got to PACAF, I was curious, what is this RIBSIP I hear about? What is this? We keep hearing about RIBSIP, and we talk about it like we already have it. Well, in a way, we kind of do, right? We have WRM, we have equipment, we have vehicles. So the first task for the team was, hey, let's stop talking about the future concept of RIBSIP, of how we want to buy all of it kitted, we want to put it in places, and let's just first look at what we have. What can we move around in the theater with the stuff we have today? What can we use better? And then also lay out what we need by hub and spoke location. How many RIBSIPs do we need? And let's work back with AFMC and the big Air Force and work to try to put some of that out there.
Yeah, so Sean kind of mentioned it, much to his chagrin. The last time Putin acted up in our theater, Congress gave us a bunch of money called EDI, and we've used that really aggressively and judiciously to get after a lot of these requirements. So I'd love to take you all to one of our sites in the Baltics or to Poland, some of the work we've done in Romania to see some of this stuff. But again, this requirement necessarily isn't something that has to be huge investment. We've got NATO military airfields that already kind of meet this standard. Commercial airports are on the list as well. But as I said, EDI's been invested over the last couple of years to really kind of build out this capability. All right, so I think we're out of slides.
I would just say one last thing, Dutch, on this is, so as we go forward, contested logistics, right? How are we going to do logistics when it's contested? So I think what I've tried to articulate is it's the basics, right? We need airmen who are really steeped in what they do, right? We've talked about innovation building on top of that, but we need folks that are really good. MCA for us in PACAF started off very specifically at these island hub and spoke locations. You're only going to have what you have there, so folks are going to have to be able to do a little more, right? And that was the MCA for us. I think as we go forward, there's a huge sense of urgency across our whole enterprise, right? In the A4, it's the Basin Logistics Enterprise Strategy. This patch you see some of us wearing, we've laid out what we need to get after as an A4 community, working with the 3 and the 5/8, and that's kind of the start of this piece. So to do the contested piece, as we know it's going to be, it's detailed operational planning, it's our concepts of employment we built, and it's the work we need to do. And then I guess before we go to the Q&A, it's about competition, right? So we're talking a lot here about conflict. We don't ever want to get to that conflict in the Pacific, because it will be a bad, bad day for everybody if that happens. So we're competing each and every day. And Indo-PACOM right now is putting the foot to the gas and pressing really heavily and saying, let's go. Let's do a lot in the first island chain. Let's go in the second island chain. So we're getting after it each and every day, and that goes back to using the logistics as a deterrent, as an enabler to get after persistent mission generation. So we don't want to get there, we want to compete. But our real challenge, I would say, on doing this is how do we do that when we have all the competing equities across the world, right? And our task with Taiwan is an away game in a really hostile area, right? It's an away game. It's an unbelievable task to do what we are going to do as a nation. So that's part of our challenge, I think, as logisticians, is how do you do this before the burning platform happens? Now, some will argue that the burning platform has already happened, I think as Admiral Walsh talked about yesterday, but have we really recognized that? We talk about it, we talk about China, 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 but have we really realized that? You know, after 9/11, after Pearl Harbor, we mass our forces and go. Well, some will say that's already happened, but have we massed to the same level in the Pacific that we need to yet? Good.
All right, so we have really just touched on the very tip of the iceberg of this subject, and both General Tyler and I could go a lot deeper on a whole bunch of concepts, operationalizing WRM, using it as a deterrence, MCA as a part of this. We put some of those thought ticklers up here on this slide, but would really be more interested, rather than us trying to tell you what we think is most important to you, is hear it from you. So the little countdown clock here says 9 minutes, 40 seconds, but my watch says we started an hour early. So we would be happy to take as many questions as you guys forward to us.
You could have put more good ideas up there if you used an F-15 for the background.
So, hey, I'm a math guy. We could have put a lot more if we'd used a C5. But my boss, you know, okay. It would have been an F-22, actually, if it had been, but at any rate.
All right, good morning. Happy Friday. We have questions lined up, ready to go.
Great.
Gentlemen, I will start with, specifically in the European theater with current events in Ukraine. Are we paying attention, watching, gathering information to see how things are playing out now and where we can glean information for lessons learned and future activities?
Yes. I wish that in this environment I could share with you the things that I'm seeing every morning on a daily basis, but I can't. I can tell you in general, though, that this has been a great learning experience for us. And you can pick up a lot of this on, you know, the open source news and stuff like that. We're learning a lot about Russia's capabilities. And I guess the bottom line is we're feeling a little bit more confident than we were maybe 6 months ago. The challenge in our theaters, right? 6 months ago, our concept was we do this, we do ACE, we operationalize WRM, we do all that as a deterrent. And right now, it's not really about deterrence. Right? It's a little bit about deterrence. It's more about assurance for our NATO allies, but it's also a truly authoritarian figure who's centralized all decision-making at that point, who's probably not waking up happy every morning. And you ask 100 different Putin experts what Putin's going to do, and you're going to get 100 different answers, right? So our focus has shifted a little bit more away from deterrence to preparedness for what could potentially come next.
All right, sir, thank you.
And Dutch, if I could jump in there. So we're hoping China, and we know they're watching this, right? And so some will say from a logistics standpoint, interoperability is really important, right, with our allies and partners. And I think one of the value add pieces in the Pacific is going to be that allies and partners. China doesn't have a lot of friends. We do. We need to leverage that. So if you look at what's happened in Dutch's AO right now, you know, Russia has pissed off a bunch of people and brought a lot of people together. So hopefully in the intent on competition not to get there, certainly the airmen that you saw at Eielson that were up here, right? They're being watched, and all the stuff that Eielson and that wing is doing is definitely helping us too, but I think the allies and partners piece will be a lesson learned out of this.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing on that. I think in every single developmental education level that I've been through, one of the topics of discussion was, is NATO still relevant, right? And I think that was a topic of discussion just a year ago. Is NATO still relevant? And talk about a pendulum swing, right? So, I mean, Germany earlier this week signed up for billions of more euro into their defense industry, which is something that hasn't happened since 1933, maybe. But at any rate.
All right, this question is for General Tyler. I don't see Diego Garcia on your map. Who owns logistics for Diego Garcia when we have to do ACE or send a bomber task force out there?
Wait, is that to me? Or did someone read my bio? No, I'll let Sean answer that one.
I learned a long time ago as an A4 that, yes, that's me. right? If it's not 3, it's the 4. But yes, that's us and PACAF and Diego Garcia. And that's a challenge too. We run that out of Anderson, one of our units that's assigned under the 36 wings, takes care of Diego. Diego's managed by the Navy from our perspective as the lead there, but that is us. And when we support our teammates, and we've got Global Strike here and AMC, and when we go to locations like that, we're responsible for those logistics from an Indo-PACOM standpoint. We work closely with General Bell's teammate if we're talking bombers, and that is a task for us out there. What do we have at Diego? Not much, right? What do we need to put there when we have a mission set in there, and what can we essentially pre-position there to hopefully minimize what we're bringing all the way over there? So Diego is definitely a PACAF piece. It may have not shown up on the map, and there's other places that didn't show up on the map, but they're there, and they're ours to support.
Have you been out to Diego?
I have not been to the Diego. In this last 13
really hard
months,
to get to.
Yeah, it is hard to get to, and that's the other piece. Traveling across PACAF, have gotten to everywhere at this point, all our mobs, but have not been to that location yet. Have not been to Australia yet. That was on my bucket list too, but wasn't able to get there. Go ahead.
Sir, if you need a bag carrier to Australia, I got your back, sir. Okay. It seems every MAJCOM is working towards their own concept of ACE and how our missions will be conducted in your theaters. Yet it seems that everyone is creating these plans in our own bubbles without enough crosstalk. How are you working with the other A4 force providers to direct requirements as they come up with their own plans?
You noticed my pause. I was going to see if Dutch would jump in. So we have the ACE General Officer Steering Group, right? So a few years ago, back in a previous air staff, maybe 2 air staff jobs ago, this ACE thing was starting up. And at the staff, we're like, what is this ACE thing PACAF is doing and others? And I'll be quite honest with you, I'm not sure at the air staff level we wanted much to do with that. Right? You know, we had a lot of responsibilities, things we're looking at. And so essentially what happened is the MAJCOMs said, well, we've got it, we're going to take it, we'll start developing it. So the MAJCOMs formed together and started working the development of ACE, and we're several years into that. And I'll tell you, in that air staff job, we knew it was something when we started getting tasked up from the MAJCOMs. Hey, what are you doing about ACE? So I think the cross-coordination that's going on is real, it's very active. And ACE is specific in PACAF. We have a specific meaning for ACE in PACAF, right? That scheme of maneuver and why we're doing it. And I've learned a lot over this past year operationally on why we have to do it and what we have to do to win, right? And as the Air Force, as we're designing the future Air Force 2030 and beyond, which is all really good, open testimony, the Indo-PACOM commander testified 2027 is when we expect China to go on Taiwan, or earlier than that. So if that happens, and we're not successful in competing, how do we do that? ACE is our answer. So we've built a concept of employment within PACAF. We shared that within PACAF with our wings, and this was an F-22 unit. How would we do a hub and spoke with just one MDS? Try to figure that out. We offer that up to the rest of the Air Force. All the MAJCOMs are building theirs, and we're working together. We have a heck of a lot more work to do on that front, but that's how we're doing. It's a continual dialogue where we're taking those objectives and trying to build that out. And MCA is a part of that also.
Yeah, so I think the key point there is a reminder that ACE is a scheme of maneuver. It's not the skills, it's not the equipment, it's not the capability, it's the scheme of maneuver. And if you look back at our contrast slides on the environments, the theaters, it's perfectly natural that our 2 theaters would have different scheme of maneuvers to get after our near-peer competitor, right? Where we need to work together to make sure we have some level of standardization and cooperation is on those skills, those capabilities, that equipment, things like MCA, right? An airman can PCS from USAFE to PACAF into a different scheme of maneuver for how it'll be executed, and that's fine as long as the skills that they're expected to be able to produce in support of that scheme of maneuver don't change. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got a lot of work to do there. I'm not sure that if an airman PCS from one USAFE base to another USAFE base, that would even be, that their expectations in support of ACE would be standardized. So that's definitely something we need to continue to get after. And I saw some encouraging things in the discussions just during the Aether sprints here. So.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. So the next question, I've actually seen a few different versions of this week, and I haven't opted to ask it, but I'll go ahead and ask it now.
Oh, save the best for last, Derek.
We've seen many new initiatives over time. How do we keep the ACE and regional base concept from becoming just another idea?
I think it starts with leadership. And we're fortunate right now, from the very high levels of the nation down, we have that leadership and focus. And that's what I think we need to do. And I think the airman piece that we saw here this week, the core at the lowest levels, that's going to be how we take this forward. Things like Tesseract and that idea and that concept that is now what you see before you today, I do agree with General Hurry's point earlier about the real task is not necessarily to have the idea, whether it's RIPSIP or some other concept, but it's how do you get it across our Air Force? And how do you fight against that bureaucracy, but also not make it a bureaucracy? So I think that's up to each and every one of us, from the airmen up to us, on not letting RIPSIP become something else, or something in a side. We have to keep that focus on, and it's the China piece, right? Now I will say China and component MAJCOM, PACAF, it's not all about Indo-PACOM in China, right? There's connections across all the combatant commands, there's connections across all my fellow MAJCOM A4s, so it's not just all about us. So even things like ACE in the previous question, it's probably okay that it's a little bit different in Global Strike or AMC, right? Because we're building to be more resilient and being able to be agile as we do the contested logistics fight. So I'd like to think it's all about us, but it's probably not all about us.
And I'll actually tie this back to the first question you asked me. What's going on right now in our theater really validates the ACE concept. Because you're right. I mean, we've talked about it in theory and how this is the way to go up against our near-peer competitors, but we've got a laboratory going on right now where we're seeing our near-peer competitor and what capabilities they have and how they conduct their operations. And we've seen a country that we've spent a little bit of time over the last decade training in that country and training them on their capabilities, and we've seen how the Ukrainians are actually using ACE concepts to still be in this thing over 3 weeks later. So that's a really, really good validation of this concept.
All right. Gentlemen, how do you see the flight line of the future, paperless forms, and Wi-Fi dependent TOs working in a contested environment that requires ACE?
Is Elon in the audience? Ask him that question. Sean?
How did I know he was going to do that? So we've got a lot of work to do, I think, in the uncontested environment to get to flight line of the future. And let's keep working on that, right? The 5G, doing it at Hickam as a test and other locations. Let's get to where we can go to a different base and plug in our CAT card and have access right away, right? Let's get to where, our F-35s from Eielson can go to Iwakuni, a tremendous Marine Corps air station, and plug in right away with their Alice and get on, and before Alice, get access, right, and be able to operate. So let's keep working on the good areas we have, those that have infrastructure. Let's keep working through all those lines and the bureaucracy and what we need to do to get that in the technology, because we need to get that for our airmen, right? In many cases, I travel out and see we are not flight line of the future in our locations, right? We want to be, we're not there yet. Some places we're getting there. So let's keep working on it in the main locations. And then I think we've got a task for ourselves to figure out how do we do that in our clusters? How do we do that in our main bases, forward bases, CSLs, as you saw earlier, when that isn't available? Because in many cases, it won't be available, so we need to plan for that. I know when I first came in the military, you'd hear post-post, right, from a supply perspective, any supply folks out there. So, but what is that post-post for the future? I'm not sure it's the same post-post 27 years ago. So we're gonna need your help to figure out what does that really look like if we don't have that connectivity.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. We've got a long ways to go to increasing those capabilities right now at our bases and as we move forces around in our deterrence mode. But persistent mission generation means that we've got to be able to launch that jet even if we're contested in the cyber domain, right? So the way we mitigate that risk is we draw down that risk on the front end with things like predictive maintenance, or predictive maintenance, so that the jets that we send forward to drive those lines are healthier because predictive maintenance has told us what parts we need to fix before they go. And I would argue that predictive maintenance is probably a good indicator for what maybe you put in those small parts kits that you send forward with it. So if it does break, you've got the part you need on hand to fix it because the algorithm told you that this is probably the next thing to break, right? So I can picture executing that ATO from a forward location without Wi-Fi if we've bought down that risk on the front end by making those investments in the things that make us more able to do that.
And the other factor is command and control. So that command and control is a big effort that sometimes we talk about at the end, right? C2, we're talking about the combat support, the other force elements. The C2 force element is really critical, and we're going to execute in PACAF under an AETF, AEW construct, and in that, we already have new types of ATOs that are essentially off the shelf as we go into these exercises and in our operations, and we're ready to push the ATO, knowing that we're not going to have access. So you go from the hub to the spoke. At the spoke, you're going to be able to have to execute in a mission command type order environment, and that includes all of us supporting that effort. So we're working on that, but much more to do in that area.
All right, thank you. Gentlemen, what are some examples of how we're working with joint partners and allies to overcome strategic logistics issues in the Pacific and in the European front?
Oh, that's a softball. That's a gimme to us. So for those that don't know, for those that don't know, in the Basing and Logistics Enterprise Strategy, under the objective of logistics under attack, or the priority logistics under attack, objective 1.5 is increasing interoperability with our joint and partners. So, and Sean and I are the two owners of that objective. So we can talk to this one. And again, you go back to the slide, I think I've got that a lot easier in my theater than he does in his. Now, of course, as the leads for Blaise for that, we're tackling that for the entire enterprise. But that's something that we've already identified for that priority. We have got to get after interoperable equipment and processes. So my vision of a perfect future is one of those red dots that was on my map somewhere in the east somewhere, and an F-35 lands, and some airmen run out, and they rearm it, they refuel it, they do whatever required maintenance is to launch it again. And another F-35 lands, and the same thing happens, and another F-35 lands, and the same thing happens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in my dream, I am completely agnostic about the national flag on the tail of that F-35 or even the uniform those airmen are wearing, right? So with that as kind of our North Star, knowing we'll never get there, because it's the F-35. Right, maybe I should have said F-16. But anyway, with that as kind of our guiding star, that's our goal is to get as far down that path as we can as quickly as possible. And so we're trying to identify the low-hanging fruit first. What can we get after? Some of the easy things. There's some things that are a lot harder. Some big apples at the top of that tree that we'd really like to get after. That's going to take some time, though.
Yeah, we've already got successes with the Australians and the C-17. We're working the C-130. We're also very interested in munitions, and the F-35 is a test case on that. What can we do on interoperability on munitions? And we're doing work with the Koreans and the Japanese on that also. So we have stuff we're doing today, and we definitely want to get towards that vision we're trying to drive to.
Okay, thank you, sir. If it works for time, I can ask a final question.
I defer to the president. Okay.
One more. All right, sir. With regard to ACE, we hear all about distributing assets in theater. How do we plan to get parts to those locations? It seems we always assume airlift is our only option. Are we able to plan ahead and consider sea lift, over the road, et cetera?
Yeah, I definitely will jump in on this one. So that is what we're working in our objectives. And so we're working there in PACAF with our component partners, and one of the clusters specifically on how we do that. So we want to pre-position at locations. Some of the locations we have personnel at today, some we don't. So we're doing things on the supply side, essentially. We're taking lease space at locations, working not with industry, not with partners, but the local businesses, essentially, and working at which helps the Commonwealth there out. So we're pre-positioning assets, and how we're going to get there, we're working with our service counterparts, right? So the Army and the Navy, and whether you're talking about POL and fuel or parts, we realize that our airlift is a constrained asset, right? We're going to use our C-130s, our C-17s to move things, but we also need to use the ships that are out there. And there's capability that our partners have offered up to us. And as we're working with our service component partners out there in the Pacific, we're learning each other's piece of how we're going to execute ACE. And each service has an ACE equivalent type concept. And we're realizing, hey, we're going to go to this location. Who else is there? Oh, the Marines are there. What are they bringing? Are they bringing fuel trucks? Well, maybe we don't need to bring as many. We could be the lead, and we'll defer to them and say, yep, you bring them, or we can go vice versa. And then we're really working on how we're going to get those items there and store them. And there are other ways to do that. So the pre-positioning piece is huge for us, because make no mistake, on the ACE piece, I will say, we are doing ACE today, and we have been doing ACE now for years. And we do it every day in dynamic force employment. We do it in exercises, and we'll do it if we go to conflict. But to do what we need to do holistically in the theater, we've got to resource it. It has to be resourced. Don't want to let you walk out of here thinking that we can do it all organically. It is not. And when I mean resourcing, I'm not just saying money. I'm talking about people. ACE is an additive requirement. And what we're trying to do in Indo-PACOM is a huge additive requirement. Some will say on the order of about 35% additional cost in resourcing the logistics alone to do that. So as a nation, we have got to invest. We saw how China is investing, right? We have got to invest in the Indo-Pacific, and we've got to do additive investing. So,
yeah, so I'll say we're considering a model in USAFE to get after this problem where if you want to push stuff forward, what kind of stuff do you want to push forward? Can you keep forward? One, you want to only push forward the stuff that has the most functionality. So it's not really, we're not really looking at the MDS specific stuff. We're looking at the more general stuff. If the enterprise, through research and investment, can get us a single piece of age that does the job that 5 pieces of age currently do, that would be exactly the sort of thing we'd like to put forward. So we want stuff that's functional. 2, we want stuff that's low maintenance. You don't want to put stuff forward at one of those locations if you got to touch it every 2 weeks to keep it operational, right? And then 3, we probably want to keep it at the lower end of the cost. We don't want to put super expensive stuff out there that's rather, our low density capabilities. So if you apply those 3 criteria to a model, and then you list out everything that you would need to take with you to execute an ATO at a forward location, and you just reverse engineer and you cross out everything that doesn't meet those 3 criteria, then everything that's left is what we're going to call an ACE kit. Everything that's left is an ACE kit that we can put in a storage location at a forward location and disperse it. Now, if all that stuff we have in there is also interoperable with our NATO partners, then we put it as an FMS buy to the nations, and they buy it for themselves, and they help us populate the theater. Wouldn't that be great? I love other people's money.
In closing, I would say to the PACAF airmen that are here and out there listening, really appreciate everything you're doing each and every day. It certainly is a rewarding, but certainly some level of stressful task that's going on right now. As we're asking airmen to do the day-to-day mission, we're doing a ton of ACE and O planning, and then doing the allied and partner work. So appreciate everything you've done, and appreciate LOA for setting this up and allowing us to talk through all these issues this week that kind of align to everything I think we're getting at in the basing logistics enterprise strategy. So thank you.
Ditto, and I will add that everything we've talked about here is not our challenges, it's our challenges, right? So everything we've talked about, there's a better solution for it than what we're thinking of right now. And somebody out there has it, and we need it. I want it. So feed it. Feed it. I know I've got some of my USAFE peeps out there. I need you guys working on this. That model I just explained for what an ACE kit is, we could really use some input on that. So it's going to take a village, a family. Sorry, General Hurry. It's going to take our family to get this done. All right.
Thank you.
I think that's it.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna ask Dutch and Sean to just stay up here for a second. I haven't done this right all symposium, so it's Friday. What the heck? I want you to know that we, as the logistics enterprise, the basic and logistics enterprise, have an incredible amount of confidence in these two officers for being those forward MAJCOM A4s who are working this problem and thinking about this problem every single day. They are really, with their folks in the command, some of the thought leaders on how we really take this concept and make it reality. I hope that that confidence that we have in them, based on what they just talked about today on the stage, gives you that same confidence, that we have the right people working these concepts to make sure that we do, in fact, have them come to fruition. Second, don't let it be lost on you that both of the general officers up here are LROs. So for those of you out there who think persistent mission generation is about the pro-super and the expediter and the munitions and getting the aircraft, yeah, it's about that. But if you think that's all it's about, you're missing the boat. It's about deployment and distribution. It's about the logistics challenges that come with persistent mission generation that even make the generation of that sortie possible. So it should not be lost on you that our two 4-stars at PACAF and USAFE wanted LROs to come be their A4s. That is significant. I think that is a huge realization of the value that our LROs bring to this persistent mission generation fight. And the last thing I'll say is, using these two officers as an example, it was not long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we didn't have an LRO general officer at the table. And we realized that was a huge gap in our Air Force, in our Air Force General Officer Corps. And it was only been through purposeful development and building a bench that has allowed us to get now 4 LROs into the General Officer Corps for the basic and logistics community. And I will tell you that you've seen some of them here for the last 2.5 days, and there's more out in the field that aren't here. We have an amazing bench of basic and logistics officers at the 05 and the 06 level that we are purposely developing so that they can become the most incredible senior leaders and general officers, and in the civilian side too, by the way, with our SESs, to really take the mantle and lead us forward on a lot of these concepts. So I didn't want that to go unsaid because I think it's a significant thing to note. And again, I just want to thank these two officers for all they're doing in PACAF and USAFE to truly be our thought leaders in this space. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.